Okay, welcome everyone to the Plant Breeding and Genetics Circle. We have Dr. Josh Udall with us today. And directly after the Plant Breeding Circle on this same link, there will be a 30-minute open session for graduate students to have a little bit more informal question and answer or discussion with Dr. Udall. So I encourage you to stick around for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Allie to introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me just fine?
Yes.
Okay, so today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Joshua Udall. He has quite a list of accomplishments, but I'll try to summarize everything in the allotted time since it's quite a bit. He was born in Utah and stayed long enough to earn his undergraduate at BYU. He went north and earned his master's in plant sciences at the University of Idaho, but then an allergy to pollen changed his plans to be a wheat breeder, and he instead ventured forth once more to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he worked with Brassica napus to create 2 doubled haploid maps using RFLP markers. Continuing his journey, he went on to the Iowa State University to work with microarrays and gene expression in tetraploid cotton. In 2006, he rounded out his journey and then returned to BYU in the Department of Plant and Wildlife Science, where he continues his research in cotton and mapping the cotton genome. His current work focuses on understanding the domestication history of cotton and its untapped genetic diversity. In his time so far, with 6 master's students, a PhD student, and several postdocs, he has authored or co-authored 65 papers, received 5 NSF grants for his cotton research at BYU, served on a great number of panels for both NSF and the USDA, received BYU's Outstanding Research Scientist Award and the Cotton Biotechnology Awards, both in 2014, I believe. On top of all of that, he is a member of the GSA and the ASPB, and is serving as an associate editor for G3 and Theoretical Applied Genetics. With all of that said, I would like to welcome Dr. Udall here to speak with us about his work in the USDA.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you a little bit about my work and also about working for the USDA. As I was asked, it wasn't too long ago that I presented my research to this group, but Ellen asked that, and I assume representing the students, that I could give a little bit about, or describe a little bit about working in the USDA ARS. And today, what I'm going to talk about focuses mostly on that, and I'll provide a little bit of structure here at the beginning of the talk to talk about how the USDA is structured, and a little bit about the turnover that we're having. And my goal in the end of this is, I hope that you will all consider, particularly those of you who are graduating soon, consider the USDA as a viable option for a career. And been on, as was mentioned, I've been on kind of both sides of the fence, working in the university first, and now with the ARS. And one of my last slides actually is describing some of the similarities and differences between the two. And if there are questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand. If I see it, I'll try and answer it as we go, but otherwise at the end is fine too. When I was at BYU as a professor there, one of the worst seminars, department seminars I heard was a fellow who came and described job opportunities in the government, and it just was pretty dry, and I wasn't very interested in it because I was gainfully employed as a professor there. And I hope I'm not that talk for you guys, but I'll do my best to keep you engaged a little bit and hopefully describe the USDA ARS with some accuracy here. So first of all, the mission of the ARS is to address agricultural problems of high priority, and to ensure that we have high quality and safe food, address the nutritional needs of Americans, sustain a competitive agricultural economy, and enhance the natural resource base and the environment. So it isn't just plant breeders and geneticists. Certainly, there are a fair number of plant breeders and geneticists within the ARS, and I'll talk about that more as we go. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of the structure of the USDA. We are down here in the bottom right-hand corner, the Agricultural Research Service, and we're one of 4 agencies. We'll call these divisions agencies here, these bullet points, within this mission of research, education, and economics. Within, there are many other missions and objectives for the Department of Agriculture. Most of the rank and file employees are inside of these missions on the bottom row here. And most employees for the Department of Agriculture are not within DC or inside the Beltway, but they're scattered across the United States based on need and congressional approval. However, everything on the second tier up is these are all offices and administrators located in the Washington, DC area. Of the 4 within the research, education, and economics, the ARS is the principal in-house research agency for any agricultural problem that the US government is trying to address. There are these 3 other agencies. I'm sure many of you have heard on the news or other media outlets, like the number or the number of acres of soybean planted, or the amount of maize that's been harvested, et cetera. That's coming out of the National Agricultural Statistics Service. Then there's the Economic Research Service that assesses the economic impact of agricultural products. And then there's our sister organization is NEFA. The 3 agencies that are not within the green box used to be housed at Washington, DC, but were recently moved to Kansas City. And that has caused quite a bit of turnover within those other 3 agencies. Those agencies also employ people who have PhDs in plant breeding and genetics, as well as people who might have degrees in public policy, statistics, of course, or economics, or other things, but they're much more multidisciplinary. For the 2 agencies that I had experience with, I'm trying to relate to or remember the time when I was a graduate student, and the 2 agencies I had experience with as a graduate student, or exposure, I should say, is to the ARS and to NEFA. My exposure to the ARS was in Wisconsin. Some of the faculty or adjunct faculty within the plant breeding and genetics program there were ARS employees, and I was aware of them and their work. And then my advisor was submitting proposals to the competitive research program. It wasn't called NEFA then, but it is NEFA now. But he was submitting proposals, and in fact, it was a NEFA or its predecessor proposal that funded my work as I worked in canola at University of Wisconsin. And the ARS has there's about 700 different projects distributed across these different labs. And I'll refer to something or how we operate is through base funding, is that we have an operational budget that's given to us each year. And typically the base funding is long-term. And I'll say more about this at the end, but projects are 5 years in, well, they're renewed every 5 years, but they typically have a long-term view and for their accomplishments. The NEFA programs, of course, those competitively funded programs are anywhere from, or grants are anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and are accessible for university groups, of course, but also ARS scientists can apply to receive NEFA grants. And then these are in addition to the other granting agencies that you may be familiar with, either FAR or NSF or NIH. So to put some faces to some of the names of those boxes, instead of a vertical alignment, I have like a horizontal here, and the ARS is the green background. Some of you may recognize either faces or names, either as administrators from call for proposals or other business that's happening from the USDA. Of course, Tom Vilsack is our recently appointed department secretary or Secretary of Agriculture with the new administration. And the ARS is, as I mentioned, is located at different locations throughout the country. There's about 90 different locations, and there's even 1 or 2 international laboratories. That it's distributed geographic or administered in geographically. There's 5 different administrative regions, and they're displayed in the different colors here. Our region, of course, is the Plains area. It's highlighted here in green, and our administrative headquarters, well, mid-tier, you might say, administrative headquarters is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Each of the areas have their own administrative head, and we refer to this as our line administration, in the sense that these are the folks that Fort Collins is the one that if I need to, well, travel was a big deal in COVID, but we did have some essential travel that needed to happen. If travel needed to be approved, it had to go up to the area. So they also approve our manuscripts before they're submitted, or, you know, essentially signing our paychecks and making sure that we get the budget that's allocated to us through Congress. All that sort of day-to-day operational mechanisms go through the area office. And each area is coordinated pretty much the same way, but a lot of it depends on who is the area director and their efficiencies and what they view as priorities. But overall, there's about 6,000 total employees. Of those positions, there's about 1,900 that are scientists or postdocs. And for this audience, of course, those are probably the positions that you would be applying for as those positions open up through retirement or other means. One question might be is, well, what are the other, 4,000 employees? Well, there's a fair number of technical staff, both technicians, agronomists, or lab technicians, or there's a fair number of administrative staff for help and administrative personnel. So that's where most of the where all the employees are, how they're distributed anyway. I will be referring to scientists as we kind of, just like at A&M or other places, you kind of adopt a particular lingo for, and if I talk about SYs or whatever, it refers to a scientific year, but that's what we mean by a position. Instead of referring to person by name, you can call it an SY. And I've got a few figures with an SY reference in them here in a minute. And then this is just to show where, where College Station fits in the grand scheme of things. This is that tree architecture, you might say, of the administrative lines. And so we've got the Secretary of Agriculture at the top and the 5 different areas here inside of the REE mission. Well, we're in the Plains area here in College Station, and we have a laboratory director here named Dr. Ivy. Some of you may or may not know him, but he administers and coordinates the 4 groups that are here. I'm the research leader for the crop germplasm unit. And in the crop germplasm unit, we have the cotton germplasm collection. We also have the pecan repository. We call it a repository instead of collection, simply because the repository is a living accession. The seeds don't preserve very long, but the trees stay alive for quite a while. And some of those are, we have about 300 acres of pecans that are maintaining the diversity of pecan. Also here in College Station, we have an insect control and cotton disease unit. The research leader there is Dr. Charles Suh. He is an entomologist by training. We have scientists, cotton pathologists working on different aspects of cotton disease, FOV4, and other components of insect control. Charles worked a lot on the cotton boll weevil, still trying to eradicate that and understand its biology better. We have a unit called Aerial Application Technology. They do what it sounds. They're the only unit within the ARS that is doing research into applying, well, aerial application of insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, that sort of thing. And then we've got a unit called Food and Feed Safety. Essentially, they're looking at salmonella in chicken meat or in eggs and different they do a lot of microbiology and control of food and feed safety for mostly for chicken, but also in bovine. Okay, so that's kind of where we fit into that. And if you don't know where we are located, we're not too far from Heap Center. The Heap Center here is right in the center of campus. I just put this here because I know not everyone has been out here. As a student, you may not make it out here unless you're collaborating on some project. But if you just go straight down Agronomy Road to the four-way stop here and take a left, we're just on the left-hand side. And we have several buildings out here. It's a campus spread out probably about, I don't know, 10, it looks from the outside 10 or 15 different buildings, but there's probably more than that hidden away. This slide is simply a slide to show the diversity of our workforce, and also it shows the diversity of different projects that we have ongoing. My exposure, again, as a graduate student was through my training at Wisconsin in plant breeding and genetics, and I was very aware that the ARS does hire plant geneticists. They also hire chemists, statisticians, computational biologists, research agronomists, and all sorts of different expertise to address the agricultural needs within the U.S. Again, this just reminds me of getting to people, and I don't want that this topic to be too dry. It will be dry, but this guy says, excellent specimen, the symbol of beauty, innocence, and fragile life. Hand me a jar of ether. So we grind up and we like to look at things from a reductionist point of view. And that tends to be a little more, getting a bit outdated, in fact, as we are, there's a constant churn within I didn't say churn, it probably has a negative connotation, but turnover within the USDA. And this is a very busy slide. And in preparation for this seminar or this discussion, I asked the HR to give some overview, some things that I might share. And this is FTEs, which stands for full-time employees. And as an agency, we've got 6,700 that are planned and 1,600 vacancies. And not all the vacancies, these are what are on the books, but all the vacancies that are out there, we're not sure exactly what to do with them. And I'll get to that in a minute. But in total, people that are working in the agency, there's about 5,000, and we have about 500 that are vacancies in progress. What that means is that the position is being advertised right now, or that or candidates are being considered, interviews are happening. And there's about 1,100 that are not in progress. Again, these are ones where perhaps person retired and there's being an assessment is being conducted whether or not we hire someone that is going to fill the same expertise, or is that going to change based on the changing needs of U.S. agriculture? So these are FTEs, and I mentioned before that a lot of these this reflects technicians, administrative staff, budget analysts, purchasing agents, all sorts of different people that enable science to happen within the government. But if you look here on the right-hand side, this is probably the most relevant to this group here. The USDA is the only agency I've been told that categorizes their scientists and we have 4 different categories. A Cat 1 scientist is a scientist with a PhD and functions much like a professor at a university. We're required to publish 2 publications a year and conduct the research that is outlined in our project plan. A Category 2 is essentially a postdoc. A Category 3 is a technician. Usually those have a master's. And a Category 4 is not quite a Category 1, but they have a PhD, but their work is more technical in nature. They're just not required to publish, but the technical work they do has been thought to require a PhD, and that's why they're at Category 4. There's not very many of those. My window, I can move this, is right on top of where I want to look. There's 380 in this. Let me go back to, let's see, can't get away from the pointer. Anyway, there's 380 individual Cat 1 scientists, and there are, I can't tell how many vacancies. There's like 100 and, what did I write down? 174 that are vacant. And that's across the agency, and you can look by area. There's the Southeast area has the most FTEs. The Plains area is second in terms of number, but we're certainly not the worst in terms of vacant and in progress. Again, I've got a couple of these slides, but this is just, I'm trying to make this relevant to students, particularly those that are graduating soon. And within the last year, this is our net workforce change. You can see where those vacancies happened, across how they were distributed through the US. Yeah, a lot of retirements happen at the end of the calendar year, and that's because of the way that the pension plan works, and there's a small incentive to coordinate that with the end of the year. And so a lot of people do that. But you can see over the last year, the net workforce change. You may be familiar with the different levels of GS. So it's the pay schedule. And there's a GS 15 is essentially equivalent of a professor. A GS 12 is essentially equivalent of an assistant professor, and an associate's in between there, either a 13 or a 14. A postdoc would be a GS 11. Most people that are hired come on as a GS 12 as an assistant professor. A few come on as a GS 13, depending if they've done a postdoc already, or a couple postdocs, or come from another job, or it's commensurate with the experience that they bring to the agency. Some people don't retire quite at a full professor rank, but they retire at the GS 14. So if you look over the last 3 years, again, we're keeping up with retirements, but there have been, at least over the last 3 years, but there have been more retirements over the last 10 than hires. So that's why there's a significant number of vacancies. Again, this is the change by month. At the end of each year, you can see where it kind of spikes down for the number of retirements and the number of net hires. Let's see. Go to the next. This is probably the most hopefully encouraging slide for those of you that are considering ARS positions in the future. This is filtered for just SYs, so these are scientists, and right now there's about a 37% that are eligible to retire, and this is the number of eligible scientists that are scientists that are eligible to retire over the next 4 years, if you count this year, so 5 years window. And by 2025, it's close to 45, even getting closer to 50% of all the scientists are going to be eligible to retire. And this is essentially over those years, this is the number that's, essentially the difference between the two, the number that are getting added to that cumulative total. But being eligible to retire is very different than actually retiring. We do not have a forced retirement within the ARS or a cap. Some countries do that with their staff scientists. They require that people retire at a certain age. That's not the case in the ARS. But it does give an indication, that a fair number of our employees can retire, and it will be happening over there is a significant amount of turnover that will happen over the next 5 years. If we just look at the Plains area here, these dashboards are kind of fun to look at. Just some of you may have connections with some of these other areas, whether they be in Texas or in other areas of the Plains, but you can see the number of planned positions, the number that are vacant and filled. It may not mean a whole lot to you if you're, without being outside of the ARS, but here's this total that are eligible to retire. So there's 89 that are eligible to retire within the Plains area. And you can see the agency splits that by SY or scientific year or non-SY, being a technical role, those in a technical or administrative role. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about budgets. One of the nice things working with the ARS compared to the university is that we are provided an operational budget each year, and Congress and the ARS total is about $1.3 billion from congressional appropriations. Recently, Biden announced his national budget, and I won't go into how budgets are made through Congress. That's a whole big discussion, but essentially one of the first steps is that the president provides guidance for where he would like money spent, and he has, but it doesn't mean a whole lot, but he has essentially indicated a 16% increase for the ARS across the board, and to the Department of Agriculture within the ARS, it actually ends up being about a 19% increase. The language in that determination is talking about critical research and development capacity for farms. So it's being connected to farmers. And also there's some language in there to connect it to climate change and sustaining crop production in a changing environment, and at that level that's coming from the White House, it really, it's kind of a lot. There's some hand waving of where it'll actually end up if it actually occurs. But fair amount of my particular research unit is our funding comes out of this crop production area, and of course Charles would come out of, with his insect unit would come out of this crop protection. But there is a pretty decent distribution of funds across the needs or the objectives or mission of the ARS. I was not aware until I was hired here at the ARS about the component of human nutrition research. And anyway, I wasn't aware that was even a part of the ARS. But the way that these allocations are determined is really according to congressional intent. And so I just mentioned that the president can kind of set the tone when he announces his budget. Every year this happens, right? But then also there are stakeholders, or what we call them for my cotton research. The major stakeholder for us is Cotton Incorporated and the National Cotton Council. those two bodies essentially are composed of growers and industry component and industry representatives to represent cotton. They will have their connections to lobbyists, and essentially between the communication between the stakeholders and Congress is essentially where we get our marching orders from on what's important for and what research should be targeted. And occasionally we will get phone calls from different programs. It hasn't happened to me in the 2 years I've been here, but different programs will get phone calls saying, hey, we've got this emerging problem. We've got some money we want you to address, you know, and this should be written into your next 5-year plan because of this, for example, FOV4 or some other invasive insect or whatever the congressional intent is, and however the stakeholders influence Congress in that way. But funding agriculture, and I don't need to tell you guys this, but I will. It's worth trillions to the U.S. economy, and it's a good investment for the taxpayer because every agricultural research returns, you know, $20 for every dollar invested. So I have this somewhat boring slide to show you, just talk a little bit about again, these 5-year cycles, and this just gives me a talking point to describe a little bit how we operate year to year, day to day. That CRIS funding I mentioned, or this project that we work under, in a way, we all work under it's like you write a proposal and that proposal gets funded. And we're working on this proposal, but included inside of that proposal is our budget for our salaries, our overhead, supplies, travel, everything that needs to happen each year. And that's what we call a CRIS. And like I said, it happens every 5 years. And in the 4th year, for every CRIS, there is a retrospective review. Essentially, it's coordinated with other projects across the country, and we look back and say, well, what was accomplished, and based on what was accomplished, how has technology changed? That's been a big component in genomics, for example. And what are the priorities that need to be addressed going forward? And then we write a 5-year proposal or 5-year project plan and address or outline what will be needed to be done in the next 5 years, and and essentially documenting how taxpayer money is going to be spent in agricultural research and what the plan is. That plan is not unlike well, I guess it's kind of similar to a soft funded proposal. It's not necessarily written in stone, but if things change, and things do change over time, you know, it's hard to see 5 years out. And if we need to address certain needs for an emerging pest or disease, or if technology has changed things and enabled us to go faster than we had thought, or slower, then we essentially coordinate that with the ARS, and we can. But it needs to be incorporated. Those changes need to be incorporated into our plan as we move forward. And the nice thing about this project plan is that we have control over our work over the next 5 years at that process, right? And like I said, it's not written in stone, but we get input from our national program leaders. And our national program leaders, I'll say a little bit more about them, but they represent that connection between industry and the ARS, or between the stakeholders and ARS. They move that information back and forth, and they coordinate, you know, who's doing maize research in which different labs, and not only just maize, but who's going to do the curation of the stocks, who's going to do the maintenance of the germplasm, and who's doing genome sequencing. They kind of make sure that everyone is doing complementary work, because it is integrated at the end of the day to provide a product for the U.S. Taxpayers. And these project plans are written with a long-term vision in mind too, different than what a proposal might be within ARS, or when I was writing things at the university. A project, it doesn't end in 5 years. It'll continue in the next 5 years. We know it will. And you have to write your 5-year, it's just a 5-year plan, but it incorporates some language for a long-term vision. For example, in the cotton germplasm collection or the pecan repository, we connect our work that's happening within the 5 years of that term of the project with a overall goal of maintaining these germplasm collections indefinitely for the use and future use of breeders and geneticists to address problems that may arise, right? So this slide here is a repeat from what I showed you before. Again, I just wanted to highlight where that national program leaders are. There's 16 of them. They're located in DC, and they have different different stewardships, you might call them, or different areas of emphasis. Peter Bredding, Jose Costa, Jago Kamura, and Roy Scott handle a lot of the plant genetic resources in genomics. The ones that I work with most are Peter Bredding. He does the collections, in particular the cotton and pecan collections I've mentioned. And Roy Scott, he handles the genomics and genetic improvement of plants across the country. And they coordinate those those efforts. And wherever, by coordinating, I'm not coordinating necessarily my my cotton plan with soybean breeder in Iowa, but they're on the same time cycle so that we all initiate our 5-year plan at the same time, and the retrospective review for everyone happens at the same time, and the advances for that for those 5-year plans is compiled into a single report, essentially, instead of having, there's 700 projects. So instead of having lots of different projects, they're bundled, if you will, by discipline. And those national program leaders make sure that happens. So, the overall goal is that the ARS research programs, that they're translational, problem-driven, and they're integrated across disciplines. And this is to deliver science-based solutions to very complex problems. So on one hand, you have the horticulture, genetics, different disciplines of horticulture, genetics, pathology, food science. All of this gets combined into a translational research. And the idea is to come up with solutions, scientific solutions for these agricultural challenges. And also coming out of these, in addition to the solutions, we get some products that come out, whether they be knowledge of basic knowledge of plant biology or knowledge of the plants, computational tools, DNA resources. So there's a lot of other deliverables that come out of this research. And in the end, the plan is, and this is why I got into plant genetics to begin with. I saw a similar slide, but with different dates when I was an undergrad, actually, and it showed that, there's agriculture today, and there's going to be and there has been a tremendous population growth. And we need to increase our agriculture output to provide agricultural products or food to the millions of people that are going to be living on the earth in the future. What wasn't apparent when I went to school as an undergrad and decided to go into this are some of the challenges that we're facing, and that particularly with climate change. It is only made, it isn't, population growth isn't the only need driving this system, but also it's getting squeezed by the amount of production is getting squeezed by climate change, and it's having an adverse effect on our plant products, of course. So, that's the overall problem that we're trying to address through our agricultural research. And as I mentioned, this is a slide that I just wanted to a quick display of kind of similarities and differences between the ARS and the university. Some of these I've mentioned. I won't repeat those. Annual performance. So wherever you go and wherever you get a job, your performance is going to be evaluated. And it's not like they're a bad process, but I didn't realize that as a student. As a student, you're evaluated by your graduate committee and your progress, and you've got maybe 3 or 4 different faculty that meet as you're on your graduate committee, and you do that hopefully more than once a year. As you become a professional, at a minimum, you're having an annual review with your supervisor. Everyone has a boss. I do too, and we're all evaluated on how we're doing, and it's a very healthy process. For me, that evaluation, it's a little bit different in the USDA in the sense that it's more frequent. We have a plan that has to be done every quarter. And I, as a supervisor, try to have short interviews. Some of them are hallway conversations, I'll admit. Some of them have been formal appointments that I've met with other faculty where we review their job performance quarterly. Proposals are writing proposals is a very important component. The things I learned at the university, writing proposals for NSF or USDA, those skills are the same skills I use to write my project plan. It's a little different focus, but it's what keeps our research moving forward year to year. And when I write my project plan, I should say this, that I have a 5-year plan, and in my budget, the ARS ideally they have a target, and it's not like this for every CRIS, but they have a target for $25,000 per year in consumable costs. So we have some money to work with and to complete our project plans. Over 5 years, that's $125,000. So it gives you some ability to conduct some research, maybe not everything. And if I write a proposal as an ARS employee, then I can get additional incoming funds. And I, of course, would have more than that per year to conduct some research. But that additional funding comes with the cost of, it should come with the cost that I'm doing additional research. I've got to complete my project plan as written, but also I've got to do this other work on top of that. So there's travel is possible, as working as a professor and here travel hasn't been possible, of course, with COVID, but typically it's about once a month I would get either out of town or on a plane going somewhere. Maybe, well, that's probably too frequently. It's probably like once a quarter, 2, 3, 4 times a year. That's easily that, maybe a little more. After a while, it was fun at the beginning, not so fun after a while. But the important part is that we're saying, I was part of the cotton research community as a university professor. I've matured in that, meaning that there isn't a whole lot of cotton grown in Utah. But coming to Texas enabled me to become more of a central part of the research cotton community. And I think here at A&M, faculty are quite lucky because of the central role that they play in agriculture and in their own respective community or research communities. Some of the differences, of course, there's no teaching. There's teaching on a different level in the sense that we can mentor graduate students. Let's see, we do have to wade through government shutdowns from time to time, which is not particularly fun. But that's essentially where I'll leave it. That's plenty of time, and that gives us 15 minutes for questions. I've prepared some slides on my cotton genomics, but let me just end there and open it up for questions.
Thank you. It's a great presentation. I appreciate you coming and doing that for us. If you have questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or if you put them in the chat, I'm happy to read them out as well.
So Josh, this is Trish. Do you think that the USDA will ever allow non-US citizens or permanent residents to work for the USDA? Is that something that's ever discussed?
It is frequently brought up for postdoc positions in particular, and I think that's where it will first happen if it does. It changes, of course, between a little bit, between different administrations, but I don't know that it'll ever change, to be honest. I certainly am not holding my breath. I have an open postdoc position I've been trying to recruit. I found a couple different qualified candidates, but they weren't US citizens. So I haven't hired anyone yet. And it is a bottleneck for us. I wish it wasn't the case, but that is a requirement for employment with the ARS.
And then can you speak to how you think that, say, the starting salary for a USDA scientist compares with the starting salary of an assistant professor at a university like Texas A&M?
Yeah, I'll have to look up. I think they're pretty similar. It really depends on average. I would say they're fairly similar. I know our postdocs are starting at about, a GS11 is somewhere around 65K a year. And the GS12 is somewhere around the low 70s. And that's starting. Again, it depends. If you start at inside of GS12, there's 10 different levels of pay. And depending on, the candidate's experience and what they bring to the table, they may be able to get, start at GS6 going in, or GS12, but step 6. And so they have a little bit higher pay, but that really is, I think, fairly comparable between the two. I don't know. Am I wrong with that?
I think that's lower than what a starting assistant professor would be brought in at these days, but I guess
Yeah.
every department is a little bit different.
Okay.
But maybe David could comment on that as well.
Well, the comment I would make is a lot of them are starting at a GS13.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so I think that's where probably the hang up is that we have people entering at GS13.
Okay.
And that would put it really close. GS15s typically get paid a little better than our early full professors.
Okay. I would comment also that when speaking of getting hired, I was hoping when I came here that to the USDA, well, I didn't know what to expect as I interviewed, but there is not a startup package, like a university will often do. Universities will often have you really quite, a new faculty will try to get them set so that they can grow and have a lab set up to address everything they need. The USDA's, and we kind of do it, we address those needs just in a different way. Much of the resources that an agronomist, for example, might need should already be in place. They wouldn't need to buy a new tractor or set things up from scratch perhaps as much. They would be joining a plan that's already in play. And so there are some differences, a little bit of difference there. There isn't a large amount that would go, officially, but some accommodations are made because everyone wants to see new employees succeed. Any other questions? How about from the students? Any questions?
That's variable from lab to lab as well.
Yeah.
That some ARS units are are more vested in some setup of a program. And maybe it's that they've left the position open for a year or two to accumulate some money to do it.
Yep. Yep.
But I think it varies a little by management structure to management structure.
Yeah.
So Josh, for these young folks who are about to get their degree and step out into the work world and are considering ARS, how they go about finding jobs that are available?
USA Jobs, that'll has them all listed. But maybe that certainly when they apply for a USDA position, it has to go through USDA Jobs. That's just the channel where the applications go. Whether they find out about it or not, sometimes those positions are open for a month or 2 months, sometimes it's just a week. And if they want to apply, or get their application in a timely manner, the best thing to do is to have that connection either with their professor or other people within the USDA that know that openings are coming up. That's probably the best. So that networking really plays a role to anticipate those job openings. The other place is, if it's possible, postdoc positions within the USDA. The intent of that postdoc position is to hire a USDA employee on a kind of as a trial basis, you might say. It's to give a PhD carrying scientist a temporary position, and but also hopefully exposure and a desire to continue to stay within the USDA once a position is open. And so I think postdocs within the USDA have a certain advantage. It's not an official advantage, it's just more of a knowledge advantage of understanding the system and probably being able to anticipate openings as they come up a little better.
Are postdoc positions restricted to citizens?
Yes, they are, unfortunately. We've been trying to get exceptions to that, but there haven't been any exceptions to that have been made to my knowledge.
Any questions for Dr. Udall, especially from our graduate students?
Dr. Udall, I had a question for you. This is Serena.
Sure.
So you've worked both at universities and obviously for the USDA ARS. Do you feel like you have more sort of creative liberty over what you decide to do your projects over, like one way or the other?
Yeah, there's a little more creative liberty in the university for sure. If I wanted to do a project on alfalfa, for example, I would get not reprimanded, but probably gently steered into a different direction. It just wouldn't happen because a lot of my day-to-day activities, in a way, are a response to a need perceived by the cotton growing taxpayers. And so they wouldn't want, to hear that some of the USDA effort of cotton is being redirected to alfalfa or whatever else. So, so I'm restricted in that way. At BYU, I had a lot more species or topics that I was working on, and I could pursue a lot more different paths and many more paths. And there are some advantages, but some disadvantages too. So not all those paths were productive. And a lot of them were, looking back, were a little bit more of a distraction than what I needed to, if I could have anticipated which ones were going to pan out into a better project a little better. So. there's some pros and cons to having that freedom. In terms of investigating, for example, if I wanted to look at recombination rates within plants or within chromosomes, if I restricted if I'm working on cotton, then it doesn't matter, but it's kind of just the way that my position is described. It's pretty much saying that I'm going to be answering to those particular the particular stakeholders, the cotton growers. So I need to keep my research in cotton, but doing basic biology, as long as it has some sort of relevance to agriculture, it certainly is. You're able to do that. Yeah.
I have a question for you, and I know that this is a really broad question, but for those of us who are in graduate school, was there an experience or something that you chose to do in graduate school that you felt really prepared you for your career, or maybe didn't do and looking back would have?
An experience that prepared me, you're saying?
Right, an experience or connection or something that you did that really helped outside of classes and the typical things that we do.
Yeah. For me, the biggest thing was I had a particular obsession with computers and Linux, and on my own, at the time, this is back in 99. I registered the plantbreeding.com and plantbreeding.org domain names. And eventually I donated those to the National Plant Breeders Association, or what, but that, and I developed a website, and I was doing all sorts of just kind of programming on the side, but that wasn't anything that was included in my program or my course of studies. And I did do one elective, and that was one computer programming class. For me, that ended up being, key to my career, really. And it's kind of where I pursued my my particular, sub discipline of getting into cotton genomics. But and I don't know how that would apply to today's students. Maybe it might be an interest in UAV or an interest in, again, computational biology, whatever. I'm sure A&M has addressed those needs, but at the time there wasn't any computational, even introduction courses given to graduate students. And so that was something I had to pick up on my own. And certainly those extracurricular interests play a role in what jobs you might find in the future.
Thank you.
So to follow up on that, when you're interviewing someone for a position in USDA, whether that be a postdoc or a GS or whatever your beginning level is, what do you look for? Let me rephrase that. What do you look for beyond their technical competency?
I think the biggest thing for me is motivation. That they can the candidates can be self-directed and self-guiding and make their decisions. As a research leader, I don't want a scientist that's coming to me to help them. I mean, I'll help and give my input, but I shouldn't be the one telling them what to do, right? I want my scientists to be able to decide how and what is important and how it should be done in their own research programs. And so I think that there needs, in both sides, whether it be university or the USDA, both that motivation and that vision of what the next step is very important. And so I guess to graduate students, I'd say, you know, once you finish your degree, think about, you know, how that project apply, what comes next for your professor? What would be the next follow-up? What would be the next, or how would you apply that to whatever your finding is to your organism of interest? And I think those two things are just that forward-looking vision, and also the motivation and being self-guiding are key items that I'm looking for in a scientist when we're being hired. But I don't think that's unique to USDA. I think that's common across, you know, any institution that's hiring.
Are there leadership or interpersonal talents, keys that you look for?
Communication. You know, if I'm having a hard time understanding or communicating during the interview, it's probably a sign that it's going to be a hard time communicating. They are going to have a hard time communicating with people that work for them. You know, as we're hiring PhDs, they certainly are going to be in a supervisory role, whether it be through graduate students or technicians. And perhaps, you know, later on there'll be other positions within the USDA. But yeah, that's important that they have the ability to communicate.
And by communicate, since you hire only domestics or US citizens, you're not talking about English language.
No, not necessarily, but that English language and the ability to communicate does not end. I mean, there is probably a high correlation, but it's not perfect between being a citizen and communication.
Now, what I meant was the ability to sit down and communicate with someone. You weren't talking about the ability to speak English. You were talking about.
Oh, yeah. No, not necessarily. Yeah, to communicate, you know, you've got to understand people, understand needs. There was a recent study, you know how they talk about studies, that I feel like I'm a good example of that right now, that they said the average conversation happens that we have every day is 50% too long. And they said the person that's talking, and they interviewed people that the person that was talking, the person was listening, and they both had the same opinion that it was 50% too long. And I just thought that was kind of funny. And I think communicating what's important is an exceptionally needed trait.
My last question, and I will yield the floor. Can you share with the students a little bit about advancement? You go in as a assistant professor level, or was it GS 11? How many years would I expect to remain at that level before I'd be eligible to go to the next one?
3 years. And then you go from, I think it's 3 years from a 12 to 13, 3 years from 13 to 14. I believe it's 5 years, 14 to 15, or sorry, it gets longer as you go on, but it's 3 years at the first step. That's a good question.
Well, we've reached the end of our time for the official plant breeding circle. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you very much for your presentation. And we will again have an open session for any graduate students who want to have a little bit more informal question and answer and discussion. So if you're interested in that, please stick around for the next 30 minutes.
Josh, thank you for the presentation. A lot of good information.
Sure. Happy to do it. Ellen, should I just hang on here then on this Zoom? It's not a separate link for the Zoom, right?
Correct. Just hang out here. I do know I try to have students sign up, and I sent it out a little later than I typically would. And so I didn't get as many sign up. I do know one in particular really wanted to speak to you. So we'll see.
Okay.
All right, let me stop recording.